Live. Live. Kamala begin.
Good morning, everyone. This is Pamela Dhonde from Kaash Foundation, and I am very glad to welcome you all for the second day of our International Faculty Development Program on Research Methodology in History, titled as Historian's Compass and Tools. Yesterday's session received an overwhelming response of 600 plus viewership, and it was live for 3 plus hours. Our yesterday's session is available on our YouTube channel, Kaash Foundation. Yesterday's session was indeed interesting. We had two important scholars in the field of history with us yesterday. Ms. Vrunda Patare from the Godrej Archives and Dr. Michelle Bowen from the Center of South Asian Studies, France. Mr. Vrunda Patare spoke on how the roles of archives have been changing over the period of time. She explained to us on how different aspects are required to build up an archive. She also told us on how the nitty-gritties of the technical aspects of building up an archive. Also, Dr. Michelle Bowen explained to us on the various kinds of historical sources that are available for an historian, but also the issues and the challenges that come up with in terms of objectivity and subjectivity while a historian is using these kind of sources. Today we are on the second day of our International Faculty Development Program, and we have with us two most important scholars in the field of history. The first is Dr. Nestor Castro, who is Professor of Cultural Anthropology from the University of the Philippines, and Dr. James Conley from the Qatar Digital Library. Before I move on, all the participants are kindly requested to fill the feedback form in the description in order to be eligible for the e-certificate of participation. Moving on, I would like to quote Philip de Montebello here. He says, "A museum is the memory of mankind." Isn't it true? Museums have always been custodians of our memories of the past, memories of our glories, defeat, victory, joy, and grief. Also, quoting Orham Pamuk here, real museums are places where time is transformed into space. Museums have always played an instrumental role in converting the times gone by, which are intangible for us, into fully physical spaces for us to visualize and experience it through tangible objects. So I would like to take this honor to introduce our first speaker for today, Dr. Nestor Castro, who is a professor from the Cultural Anthropology Department from the University of the Philippines. He will be presenting on museums as repositories of our history and heritage. Over to you, Dr. Nestor. We welcome you to our second day of our International Faculty Development Program. The floor is yours now. Thank you. Sir, sorry to interrupt you. Could you please put on your audio so that you're audible?
Okay. Good morning to everyone listening from India, watching from India, and good afternoon to those from the Philippines. It's already 12:30 in the noontime here in Manila. So today I will be talking about museums as repositories of history and heritage. So let me share to you my presentation. Okay, so this is the title of my presentation, Museums as a Repository of History and Heritage. First of all, I would like to tell you where I'm coming from. So this is what is called in the social sciences as positionality. Before you argue something, you must emphasize where you're coming from. So I teach a course in museology among the many courses in anthropology that I teach at the University of the Philippines here in Metro Manila. I have also curated several ethnographic and ethnoarchaeological exhibits, both at the University Museum at the University of the Philippines and in a local museum in Pasig City, which is found also in Metro Manila, which is the capital region of the Philippines. Thirdly, I am currently the president of the International Council of Museums in the Philippines. So the International Council of Museums, or ICOM, is an international body and it has many national committees. I am the president of the Philippine National Committee, having been elected into office only last year. So let me first introduce to you what ICOM is in case there are people watching who are not familiar with the International Council of Museums. So ICOM is an international organization of museums and museum professionals committed to the research, conservation, continuation, and communication to society of the world's natural and cultural heritage, the present and the future, as well as the tangible and the intangible. Later, I will discuss the difference between tangible and intangible cultural heritage. ICOM is based in Paris and its membership as of the present is 44,686 professionals. These are museum professionals found in 138 countries all over the world. At present, it has 118 national committees. The Philippines has one national committee. And ICOM, as an international body, has 32 international committees depending on the type of museum, what specialization it is in. Again, later, I will tell you about the types of museums and the specialization. So, to level off about the presentation, let us first define what a museum is. Of course, a museum can be defined in many ways, but ICOM, as an international body, agreed way back in 2007 about a common definition of what a museum is. According to ICOM, a museum is a non-profit, permanent institution in the service of society and in development, open to the public, which acquires, conserves, researches, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purpose of education, study, and enjoyment. So I highlighted two terms, two keywords. First is research, since research is one of the functions of a museum. And since this is a seminar or a webinar on methods of research in history, I will emphasize that a museum conducts researches. If it's a historical museum, of course, it conducts historical researches and it engages in exhibition work of tangible and intangible heritage. I underscored heritage because it is one of the things I want to discuss today. The objectives of a museum exhibition are threefold: for education, study, and enjoyment. So all of this should be part of the objectives for a museum. So we do not consider as a museum galleries that do not engage in research but just exhibit. We do not consider, again, institutions that do not have collections, because a museum acquires collections. And again, this is the prerogative, of course, of ICOM. Profit-making museums are not part of the membership because it is supposed to serve humanity. Of course, museums, several museums collect entrance fees, some waive fees, but these are all for maintenance purposes and not really for profit. A second term, aside from the museum, that I would like to define is what cultural heritage is. This time, I'm using a definition from UNESCO. According to UNESCO, cultural heritage is the legacy of physical artifacts and intangible attributes of a group of society that are inherited from past generations and maintained in the present and bestowed upon for the benefit of future generations. Again, I highlighted the term past generations since we shall be talking about history. Of course, museums can depict artworks, but this is a different type of museum. It's an art museum. But if it depicts artifacts, items, objects that are passed on from one generation to the next, then it falls into the realm of a museum engaging in the exhibition of cultural heritage. Now, this is a graphical representation of the total natural and cultural environment that we have in the world, with people at the center of this diagram. And of course, cultural heritage can be tangible, such as objects, artworks, documents, or intangible, such as living heritage, the arts, people's voices, values, traditions, languages, oral history, folk life, creativity, adaptability, and distinctiveness. So one challenge is, how do you depict these intangibles? And I will cite particular examples here in the Philippines. The cultural heritage can also be classified as immovable or movable. We call them immovable mainly if they're located outdoor, such as the case of archaeological sites, places, landscapes, waterscapes, structures, and sculptures. We're referring here to build big sculptures that are immovable, and movable or indoor, such as in the case of smaller objects and artworks such as paintings. So this is one categorization of heritage, not just cultural heritage, but also physical or natural heritage, in terms of whether they are natural, built, intangible, or movable. So I just chose four specific examples. One natural heritage of humanity is Mount Everest. An example of built heritage is the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza in Egypt. An example of an intangible heritage is how in southern Philippines, women weavers weave the tinalak textile, which I'll explain later. And movable heritage, such as paintings, in this particular example, Van Gogh's painting of his self portrait. Now, what is important is not just identification of types of artifacts, landscapes, and objects, but what stories do they tell? Because if they don't tell any stories, then they're unimportant. So, for example, for natural heritage, one good story is how many climbers have gone to the peak of Mount Everest. Since it was first discovered, how many died along the way, from what nationalities did they come from, etc., etc. And this may be of interest to different groups of people. For a built heritage such as the Great Pyramid of Khufu, an important story will be when was it built? Why was it built by the pharaoh? For what specific purpose was it? Is it true that it is aimed to attract extraterrestrials? And other stories which may not be true or not, but these are of fascination to many people. Now, with the tinalak textile in the Philippines, a good story, of course, the textile itself is tangible, but how it is made is intangible because it is passed on from generation to generation. The knowledge of how to produce it. Only women weave these textiles, and the designs of the textiles are inspired through dreams. That's why they are called dream weavers. They don't just invent any design, but in the evening, they dream about a certain design, and in the morning, they begin their project of doing a specific textile work. Now, for uh, Vincent van Gogh's self portrait, you will see here that he has a bandage at his right ear because he cut off his ear. And it would be interesting to know, why did he do it? Was he in a period of depression? And you will see, if you visit the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, you will see that Van Gogh's greatest paintings are when he suffers depression. So we are more interested in the stories that are being told by specific types of heritage. Okay, now let us go to museums. Where did the museums originate? The English word museum actually comes from Latin, which is derived from the Greek word museion, which literally means the seat of the muses. Of course, in Greek mythology, there are certain muses for the arts, for the fine arts, for music, for poetry, etc. And the Greeks and later the Romans believed that there would be hubs or centers where these muses may be located. So in ancient Greece, a museion referred to a temple dedicated to the nine muses. A muse for the arts, a muse of the epic, a muse of music, of love poetry, of oratory, history, tragedy, comedy, dance, and astronomy. It reflects the attempt to bring all the fields of human knowledge in one place. So this is why I am talking about museums as repositories. Of course, for a specific type of museum, called as a general type of museum, all of these types of quote unquote muses are located in that museum. You will see art collections, you will see astronomical gadgets, you will see documents of love poetry, all in one place. So, this is the inspiration of a museum. And so far, the oldest museum that we know, what we call the first proto-modern museum, is the Royal Complex at Alexandria in Egypt, established way back in the 3rd century BC. So the earlier Greek and Roman museums were not really proto-modern because they were temples. So there was no separation between the sacred and the profane. But a proto-modern museum will be now more profane. It is non-sectarian, and it houses these different types of objects. So you will see here artists' conception about the royal complex at Alexandria. So the picture below is the complex because it includes a library, it includes a zoo, and the museum is depicted in the reconstruction above. This is what it looked like before. Of course, we don't have pictures of how it looked like in the past because there were no pictures yet. And unfortunately, the royal complex at Alexandria got burned down. So we don't have any trace anymore of the actual museum. So this complex contained a library and a space for the collection of artifacts, including statues of thinkers, astronomical and surgical instruments, elephant trunks, animal hides. So there was a library and a museum where there was a collection. And you will see there's a collection of different antiquities. They did not just come from Egypt, but were also collected in other parts of the old world during that time. It also had a botanical and a zoological park. Now, why do we call it proto-modern and not really a modern museum? So we call it proto-modern because it is no longer a temple, but it is still not modern because it is exclusive for the use of scholars. So it was not accessible to the public, but only scholars, those who researched about philosophy, the great thinkers, those of the nobility, they were only the ones who could access this museum. And this is not what a modern museum is. So what is a modern museum? Now, the first modern museum was, of course, the British Museum, quite very recent. It was established in 1753 and it was considered the mother of modern museums. The difference is it was accessible to the public. You will see the edifice outside of the museum, how it looked like. It was a direct emulation of the museum at Alexandria. So you have these tall Roman columns. That was how it looked like in Alexandria, and they tried to copy it in the British Museum. Of course, not really perfectly the same, but it was an emulation. As I mentioned, one difference that makes it a modern museum is that it was already open to the public and not just the scholars. Even the library located inside the British Museum is accessible to the public. You could go there, you could browse through it. Of course, some collections are off limits. You would need to get a permit, but generally, the general public could enter the museum, of course, after paying an admission fee, and then look at the exhibits. It's a very big museum. Uh, Actually, you cannot see all of its exhibits within one day. And for those who have not been to the British Museum, it is actually very, very huge because the British have collected sculptures and artifacts coming from their colonies. So you will see Sphinx coming from Egypt, obelisks, facades of temples inside the museum. So a while ago, I mentioned that there are different types of museums. One categorization, because museum practitioners debate a lot about what are the different types of museums, but this is probably a practical classification. I classified it into 6 types. The 5 ones are the basic ones: a general museum, a natural history and natural science museum, a science and technology museum, a history museum, an art museum, and a more recent one will be a virtual museum. A general museum tries to house within the museum complex different types of artifacts, different types of objects, different types of tangible heritage, whether they're artwork, historical, archaeological, religious, musical, etc. Most national museums are general museums. A natural history and a natural science museum type will house those in the realm of the natural sciences, such as geologic or geographical museums, metallurgical museums, botanical museums, etc. etc. Science and technology museums would focus more on technological objects and gadgets, such as human inventions during the period of industrialization, ancient gadgets used by our ancestors, etc., etc. History museums, and I will focus on that later, of course, will collect historical objects. Art museums focuses on the display of art. It is different from an art gallery. An art gallery displays artworks and with the intention of selling them. But an art museum, of course, engages in collection, research on art, and exhibition. So it will have a good collection. So what is shown in the picture is the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or the Met, found in New York, and it already has many branches in different parts of the world. Now, a more recent type will be a virtual museum, because you don't have to go to the museum to access and view the collections, but go online to make a virtual tour of the museum, and the collections of that particular museum, whether they're of art, history, technology, etc., are digital collections. So a virtual museum, they could cut across the five types. Now, focusing on history museums, because we will talk about historical research and the role of museums in undertaking historical research. One classification of different types of history museums is the follows. First is Antiquities Museum. So it engages in collection of antiquities, or old ancient objects. Egyptologists, sinologists, Indologists, they collect a lot of objects aimed at displaying the people's fascination with these very beautiful and spectacular objects. Of course, many of them were found archaeologically, but some of them were just purchased by the museum from grave hunters, from middlemen. That's why I would differentiate an archaeological museum, which engages in actual archaeological work, and it may not display spectacular uh, types of artifacts, but museum goers can understand, for example, how it was in human prehistory, such as the display of stone tools during the Paleolithic, or the Mesolithic, or the Neolithic age. An ethnographic museum displays ethnographic artifacts or material culture. Now, why is it still considered a historical type? Because this gives us a link between the present and the past. There are certain material objects that are still being created and used by indigenous peoples, by traditional societies, but have now disappeared in the modern city world. But ethnographic collections can show us how it was made in the past, even if it has already disappeared in the cities, but some indigenous peoples continue to produce these types of artifacts. A cultural historical museum could engage in folk culture, sometimes even pop culture. So the focus more is on culture at present, and again, how it is linked to the past. It may be culture within the modern world, such as a display about urban legends. Historic houses are structures or houses that have been maintained and preserved by certain foundations or governments and became museums. For example, the Anne Frank Museum, again in the Netherlands. So it is a house where Anne Frank hid during World War II. People can visit it and see what it was like. And you could see the diary of Anne Frank displayed in it. War museums, and there are many of this in the world, display war artifacts. So the picture here is from the Vietnam Military History Museum in Hanoi. Of course, showing tanks. You will see a flag of the Liberation Army in South Vietnam when it was not yet liberated from US forces, together with the flag of North Vietnam during that time. So the aim of the Vietnam Military History Museum is to showcase the uh, the bravery of the Vietnamese people in fighting American occupation forces and the earlier French forces in Vietnam. So, what do museums do? All museums, regardless of type, conduct research and documentation. This, I think, and I believe, is the most important component of a museum's task. All museums acquire materials. You cannot be considered a museum if you don't have any collection. Now, I know there are people who are collectors, private collectors, but if they don't engage in research, then it's not a museum. If their aim in collecting is to sell, then it's also not a museum and it's not for the public. So a museum acquires materials, and of course, there should be a specific plan of what materials to acquire. So if you visit a museum, what you just see is the exhibition area. You don't see many of the acquisitions, which are hidden in the storage areas as well as in the vaults, especially if they are very expensive objects. Most often, what are displayed, especially for the expensive ones, are replicas, while the original expensive ones are kept in treasure vaults, only displayed in very important occasions. So a museum does just not collect anything, but they have to have a plan of what to collect, what not to collect. A third function will be identification, accessioning, and inventory. And this is why we have to train museum professionals, because there are scientific methods of identification. For example, someone may sell an object to a museum and you don't know where it actually came from. So, how do you identify it? There would be certain techniques or tools that can be used in order to understand the provenance of a particular artifact. I cannot discuss this right now because that will be a topic for a future webinar. Aside from identification, there's a need to classify, catalog, or accession the artifacts. So each artifact is assigned an accession number. So for those of you who frequently visit the library, you will see there's an accession number for every book. This gives us an opportunity to immediately retrieve the artifact whenever we need it for further research in case we have new data, to add additional information, and also to find out whether we have whether it's still there or not, which is what inventory is all about. So A museum counts how many objects or artifacts it has, and every year, or even more often, it conducts an inventory of what they are, what types, where are they found, in what condition are they in, do we need to uh, restore or protect these artifacts, or is the safekeeping method not good enough? This is done in an inventory work. I mentioned restore because that will be the fourth function: restoration, protection, and storage. Many of these artifacts are very brittle. They could decay easily if not kept in good conditions. Science has improved a lot. So in the past, we have kept artifacts not in a scientific manner. We have cleaned them not in a scientific manner. Now we know what will be the best practice. So we improve on restoration, protection, and storage work. For example, in our own museum in the Philippines, this is the National Museum of the Philippines. Way back in the 1960s, they had this uh, non scientific method of cleaning uh, artifacts with the use of kerosene in order to clean them. Now we know it's wrong because it taints the artifact, and once you date it, you find out the date of the artifact, there would be errors in the dating. So we now know what is good practice and what is bad practice. And this is why ICOM conducts international conferences and trainings in order to keep professionals abreast about the most recent practices. A fifth objective or activity of a museum will be exhibition. For the public, usually this is what they only know about a museum. A museum engages in exhibits. But for museum practitioners, this is just part of several functions. Now that we have a global pandemic, this is COVID-19, many museums in the world right now are closed and there are no exhibitions. So many are asking, what are you doing right now that you don't that your museums are closed? Well, this is the best time to engage in the four previously mentioned functions: research and documentation, acquisition of materials, identification, accessioning and inventory, restoration, protection, and storage. This continues despite the lockdown in many countries. And once the lockdown is lifted, museums can open again for their exhibits. Now, an exhibition can be very boring if it is the same type of exhibit the whole year round. Most museums will have a permanent exhibit as well as changing exhibits. The changing exhibits attract museum goers to go back to the museum and this time to see the new exhibitions. The last type of museum activity is engaging in information and education dissemination. So museums engage in outreach projects and programs, such as going to schools, attracting school children, giving walking tours, posting exhibitions online for so that they are accessible to the bigger public. These are part of information education activities of the museums. And depending on the type of museum, each museum will have a certain type of advocacy of why it is informing the public about certain types of artifacts or objects. Now, because I come from the Philippines, I will talk about museums in the Philippines. I cannot talk about museums in India because you are more familiar about your own museums. And of course, this will give us an opportunity to have sharing about what is the practice here and the practice in your own country. And if we have viewers coming from other countries, they could also look at their own practice. So, for those who are not familiar with my country, the Philippines is found in Southeast Asia. So, you see a map that is encircled. We are an archipelago of 7,000, more than 7,600 islands. Previously, we know 7,100 islands, but with improvements in GIS, we are able to locate new islands in this archipelago, many of them uninhabited. So it is part of insular Southeast Asia, Indonesia below. We are below Taiwan. Manila is the capital city, and the capital region is what we call Metro Manila. It's a combination of the city of Manila and other cities surrounding Manila. This is a problem we have now. We don't have an exact count of how many museums there are in the Philippines. We should agree. They are both public and private museums. So there are approximately 200 museums all over the Philippines. There is no agreement because some are galleries and ICOM does not consider them as real museums. Some are branches of a main museum, so they are not counted separately. So, where is the origin of museums in the Philippines? So, the picture you see is the oldest university in the Philippines. This is the University of Santo Tomas, found in Manila, established by Spanish priests way back in 1611. Now, in UST, or the University of Santo Tomas, way back in 1682, there was established what was called the Gabinete de Física, or the Cabinet of Physics. So it was established in November 22, 1682, by the royal decree of King Charles II of Spain. And the purpose of this cabinet, of course, it is a museum, is to complement classroom instruction. So this gabinete collected artifacts from all over the Philippines through different Dominican parishes all over the country. They were collected and sent to the university, studied by Spanish priests as well as scientific scholars, and displayed in this museum. So this cabinet was a room. It was only a room where specimens of flora, fauna, and minerals could be studied in detail. We could also call it as a laboratory because students could go there and study these specimens in order to complement their education. Now, although it was established in 1682, this museum continues to exist. And this is why it was the first museum in the Philippines and still is the oldest museum in the Philippines. So we now call it the UST Museum, or the University of Santo Tomas Museum. So it is accessible to the public. Now it is no longer just a room, but a bigger space where you can see collections from way back in the 17th century up to the present, both archaeological as well as ethnographic specimens. Now, I mentioned a while ago that in the Philippines we have a national museum. This is the edifice of the National Museum, the picture above, and you will see again it is an emulation of the British Museum, which is an emulation of the Royal Complex of Alexandria. So this is how old museums function. They wanted to copy uh, the progenitor museums. But inside the old museum building, you will see this time this is the National Museum of Natural History, one of the several buildings of the National Museum complex in the Philippines. It is a very modern museum inside a very old building. So the National Museum of the Philippines was originally called the Philippine Museum, and it was established by the Americans in 1901 as a natural history and ethnography museum. So the UST Museum was established by the Spanish, the National Museum by the Americans, because the Philippines was a colony of Spain for 300 years, and then followed by the Americans for about 50 years. Okay? So now it is called the National Museum, and within Manila, there is a National Museum complex composed of 4 buildings: the National Museum of Anthropology, which houses the ethnographic and archaeological collections; the National Museum of Fine Arts, which houses works of art; the National Museum of Natural History. This is very recent, and this is what is shown in the lower picture. And the planetarium, which is mainly an astronomical museum. Aside from the National Museum in Manila, the National Museum has field stations in different parts of the country. Uh, Here you will see this is a field museum in outside of Manila. It's called Binangonan, and it shows petroglyphs. These are ancient rock drawings or petroglyphs. So the person in blue, actually, that's me looking at the petroglyphs. Now, I would like to give you a tour, a very short tour of the National Museum. Okay, so we saw from that video that the National Museum will have wide spaces so that people can go in. We see that the exhibitions or the artifacts on exhibit are not crowded. There would be spaces, there would be labels that people can look into. Of course, there would be guided tours where uh, there would be professionals and even volunteers who could help museum goers understand what the exhibit is about. So what we saw are mainly ethnographic and archaeological collections. Now, let me highlight some collections which may be of interest to our viewers now. So, some of the archaeological collections include, in the picture in the left, that's the Manungul jar found dated 890 BC. That's me in the picture. So, it's a secondary burial jar. When people die, they are buried on the soil or in coffins. But then, after the body decomposes, the bones are transferred into these jars. Now, you will see, so it's an earthenware jar, and uh, there on the top of the cover of the jar, there are uh, sculptures or figurines of two people riding a boat. The one in front is a representation of the dead person, while the one at the back is the boatman rowing the boat in order to deliver the dead into the afterlife. So this artifact shows the early belief systems of Filipinos. The second collection that I'm showing here in this slide is the Laguna copper inscription. So it's a copper plate. The dating is 900 AD, and it is written in a syllabic script, which we believe is of Sanskrit origin. So the writing system was borrowed from India, but entered the Philippines through Indonesia or the Bugis people of Indonesia, and then went into the Philippines. So early Filipinos, prior to the coming of the Spanish and upon the coming of the Spanish, used a syllabic script. Most Filipinos are no longer familiar with this syllabic script. They only know them through art, and we want to revive this tradition. Now, it is interesting that this syllabic script of 900 AD, it is actually a document that is a proof that a certain person no longer owes a particular debt from another person because he has already paid the debt, and therefore his children and grandchildren are no longer expected to pay the debt. Another type of collection will be a boat. We call it the Butuan boat. This is located in a field station of the National Museum in Mindanao Island, in south of the Philippines. So it is the planks of the boat that are preserved when it was recovered from the soil. And it enabled early Filipinos, because we are an archipelago, to conduct trade with other Southeast Asian and even mainland Asian societies. The picture on the right shows a death mask made of gold found in the Visayas region in central Philippines. So this is a skull, and the corpse then was covered by a mask made of gold. What they covered are the eyes, the nose, the ears, even the mouth, because they believe these are the orifices where spirits could come in. So these masks are aimed at preventing bad spirits into entering the corpse or the body of the dead. Another government body. So the National Museum is a government body. We also have a National Historical Commission of the Philippines. It is the Philippine government body responsible for the conservation and preservation of the country's historical legacies. At present, the NHCP, or National Historical Commission of the Philippines, manages 27 historical museums spread throughout the archipelago. The NHCP is an institutional member of ICOM, where I come from. So what is shown in the picture is the Emilio Aguinaldo Museum, found south of Manila. Emilio Aguinaldo being the first president of the Philippine Republic. He was the president of the Philippines in 1898. Okay. Now, aside from government museums, we have several private museums. Among the best ones will be the Ayala Museum, found in Makati in Metro Manila. The Ayala Museum was established in 1967 by the Ayala Foundation, which is a private foundation. It houses ethnographic and archaeological exhibits on Philippine culture, art, and history. So here is, this is what the building looks like, and inside you will see it is a very modern museum. Right now, actually, the Ayala Museum is closed because, again, it is being renovated and rehabilitated. But let me show you a slide depicting information material coming from Ayala Museum.
Objects and living traditions, very much part of the experience and expression of piety and devotion. Our worldly activities have made their opulent production possible. Hinduism and Buddhism spread widely and significantly in both mainland and island Southeast Asia, becoming the bedrock of ancient kingdoms like the
So these are the roots of trade of the Philippines, connecting to Khmer Kingdom in Cambodia, Of course, the Khmer Kingdom will connect to India. So these are the reasons why several artifacts, such as this gold, have entered the Philippines. Many Indian scholars will recognize what these are, such as this Garuda design earrings unearthed in central Philippines.
also has dangling spangles. Other Hindu Buddhist images besides
This is a kinari figurine made of gold found in Mindanao.
the sea serpent Naga, notably
Naga handle of a sword.
interpretation of these objects disproves earlier scholarly texts saying Hindu and Buddhist religions did not spread to the Philippines. The abundance of gold deposits in the islands and evidence of local goldsmithing tools and molds also suggest
Because, of course, the Philippines is very rich in gold, and this is the reason why we have several gold artifacts.
discovered about our religious practices and
As a matter of fact, in many countries, the Metal Age chronology was iron, bronze, and gold. But in the Philippines, we had gold needles first because it was very much available in the country. So this shows the coming of Islam into the Philippines and how it has influenced the design of textiles and other material culture.
complex geometrical characteristics of arts. It is a versatile textile which can be worn on the head and over the shoulder. Tied on ends of swords, used for ceremonial purposes, and even on walls as decoration. Eventually, most
Then coming of Spanish artifacts. I won't go into that right now because I have very limited time. So I'll go to my next slide. Okay, so these are some of the gold collections in Ayala Museum. So golden Garuda ornaments, circa 10th century AD. Golden Kinari, of course, this is half female, half human, half bird figurine. A gold halter worn around the shoulders, and it is very heavy, also 10th century AD. And you will see from a document published in 1590 during the Spanish occupation called the Boxer Codex. It shows how early Filipinos looked like. So these are Tagalogs. This is the ethnic group found in the Metro Manila region and surrounding provinces. And you will see on the shoulders, extending from the shoulders to the waist, will be these gold halters. And we have the actual artifacts. Now, let us go to, since this is a discussion about research methods, what type of research methods do museum professionals and museums engage in to do historical research? So among the research methods commonly done are archaeological excavations, archival research, ethnographic research, key informant interviews, and genealogical research, among others. So this picture shows an archaeological survey undertaken by my students at the university in a province in southern Luzon Island of the Philippines. Luzon Island is where Manila comes from. So we teach our students techniques in doing archaeological excavations. And of course, the collections are deposited either in the university or surrendered to the National Museum, depending on an agreement with the National Museum. Aside from research methods, of course, we engage in archival research. Historians know this very well, the importance of documents. Now, in the Philippines, documents can be written in the early syllabic script, such as we call them baybayin, Philippine syllabic script. This is found, the picture on the left was found at the UST archives, University of Santo Tomas. It is a deed of sale, but written in early Philippine script, now no longer used in the Philippines. Another type of document, and this will be voluminous, written in Latin script, but in the vernacular languages of the Philippines. So this document at the right is a document of the Philippine Revolution against Spain, dated 1892, written in Tagalog language, but we were able to retrieve it in Spain, in Madrid, because of course, many of our archival documents and artifacts have been brought to Spain by the colonizers. Aside from this, we also find many documents written in Spanish and then in English, and therefore they are found in libraries in the US. This is why the archivist has to go to many countries in order to retrieve these documents and study them. Now, it is important to correlate the archival with the archaeological, because sometimes the archival documents are from the point of view of the colonizers, and therefore is tainted by the bias of the colonizers. We want to validate if this is indeed true based on the archaeological records. So there's a triangulation of sources: archival, archaeological, ethnographic. An ethnographic research engages in participant observation, where the researcher is sent to a particular community in order to study village life and document and interact what is being observed in that particular community. So, for example, if we collect material culture, these material objects do not speak for themselves. For example, if it's a basket that was just collected, we don't know the stories. Is it a basket used for storing vegetables? Is it used for fishing? We will only know the cultural context if we go to the field and understand how it is used at present or how it was used in the not too remote past. Of course, this also requires key informant interviews with people who still remember certain types of information, such as family histories, local histories, accounts about specific historical events. Of course, all of these things have to be correlated with the other, because the informant may also have poor memory, and therefore we want to correlate it, associate it with the archival documents as well as the ethnographic materials. Genealogical research is important, especially in cultures without written records. And we have many of this in the Philippines. So they rely on oral traditions. The picture shown on the left is a shaman, a native priest in northern Philippines. They practice in the past head taking. They take the heads of their enemies and keep them as war trophies. And many of these shamans could recite their genealogies. In one particular study that we did, a particular shaman could recite verbally 25 generations of ancestors, that he descended from this person who descended from this person. So it is a computer, but a mental computer. Of course, genealogical research also goes into looking at church records, examining tombstones, etc. Now, the last part of my discussion, I would like to talk about a particular research that we did, I and my students did with a local museum. This is the Pasig City Museum. That's the picture of the museum, where in 2009, I curated an exhibit on the pottery making tradition of the town of Pasig. And my students, as well as volunteers from the University of the Philippines, helped me in setting up this exhibit. The aim of the exhibit was to document pottery making tradition in the town of Pasig as part of the city's intangible cultural heritage. So this picture on the left shows an old 1901 picture of how pots were made in Pasig during that time through an open firing technique. When I sent my students to the field in 2008, we already saw how it was being made with the use of a hand wheel. So our exhibit was in 2009, and a year before, my students were already conducting research for the exhibition. So we relied on archival research, such as these photographs. We observed how potters did it and interviewed them. And we looked at the changes that it went through. So the research teams that we organized for this particular exhibit was a historical research team, particularly looking at archival records, ethnographic research team doing participant observation, an audio visual documentation team because they have to be professionals in taking photographs. Not everyone could do it. And those that we tapped are my students, graduate students in world archaeology, and undergraduate students in culture change and applied anthropology, as well as film students from my university. They are not my own students, but they volunteered for this project. So it was a very big research team. And the exhibit ran from February 9 to April 30, 2009. Actually, the exhibit was supposed to be until March 30th only, but it was extended due to strong public demand. So in the picture on the left, you will see a student, a high school student, looking at a replica of a grave site that we did to showcase that early Filipinos included in burial sites pots, pottery as part of their grave wear, so that the dead could carry with them in their afterlife these pot items. We also did replicas. This is a what we call the pot seller man. It is one of the famous replicas in the exhibit. It was based on a real photo, but we did it artistically, or my students did it. And of course, school children will have pictures because many among the younger generation want selfies. We also invited a real potter. He's an old man who still makes pots in Pasig the traditional way. And museum visitors were able to see how it is made. Of course, there were lectures as well as audiovisual presentations also during that exhibit. Now, what were the lessons learned during that exhibit? An important lesson is the importance of strong collaboration between museum practitioners and the local government, as well as the academe, for the success of the exhibit. If the exhibit was just mounted by the museum practitioners, probably not many people will go there and have interest. Or if it was just done by the academe, the local government won't support it. So in this case, it was a collaboration of three institutions. Another important lesson is the need for the exhibition team, which includes professionals, students, and volunteers, to be trained well in undertaking good research. So you don't just send the team out into the field to do research. There has to be serious training first. How to document, how to take pictures, how to interview, how to measure before they are sent to the field. Third, there is a need to tap local stakeholders. In this case, the local potters, community residents, heritage advocates, and others, so that they will recognize that this exhibit is their own exhibit. They have ownership of this exhibit. It is not something imposed on them by outsiders, but they have an objective to protect it and propagate it themselves. Now, to end with my discussion, let us go back to my main title for this presentation. Why is it important for a museum to be a repository? A repository of history as well as heritage. It is because many of the tangible and intangible cultural heritage that we have in the world today are already disappearing, and many of them are threatened or endangered, and many of this due to modernization, such as demolishing old buildings so that new malls, shopping malls can be established. So once these heritage structures and objects disappear, knowledge of the past and about history also disappears. Once the shaman is already dead, once the pot maker is already dead and has not transferred his knowledge, then the knowledge, the intangible knowledge, is also lost. So the museum is a repository where these artifacts are preserved and protected, where these living specialists such as shamans and potters can still go and teach young children how to continue the craft. This is one of the functions of a museum. Another important point is that museums also serve as cultural hubs for related activities. It is difficult for any person to go to a site. For example, he wants to understand how traditional pots are made. He cannot just go to a potter to learn about the craft. In the museum, it is centrally located within a town or municipality or a city, so it is very accessible. People can go there, people from all walks of life can go there and see the activities in that museum, such as exhibitions and all those who are interested can also go to the museum to undergo trainings for professionals, trainings for the public. For example, a training on art appreciation, a training on history appreciation. There will also be symposia open for roundtable discussions that are conducted by museums. There are also cultural performances such as by an orchestra, a folk artist, a singer, a pianist. They
Sir,
are invited to the museum. Yes, I'm
sir,
ending.
I am sorry.
Yes, this is the last slide actually. And they are
Sure, sir.
invited there to go to the exhibit. So with that, I would like to end my discussion with these challenges. The challenges are how to encourage stakeholder participation, how to continue and sustain funding for museums, making museum visits affordable, and making museums friendly to the younger generation. So with that, I would like to thank you, and my email is here in case you have questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nestor Castro, for your deliberation on how museums have been serving as repositories of our museum and heritage. So you very well explained on in the terms of Philippines as a context, and I'm sure that this is the same in how museums in India also function. Like, museums really serve as good repositories and reservoirs of India's heritage and history. And also, I really liked as to how you said that even in these times of COVID-19, museums haven't stopped functioning. They are still in the process of acquisition and cataloging and preserving, so that when the world finally opens, when museums are able to open to the public, people are able to come and again experience the beauty of museums. So, thank you very much, sir. We are really honored to have you here on our International Faculty Development Program. Thank you very much. For those who logged in late, we are in the second day of our International Faculty Development Program on research methodology in history on the theme of Historians' Compass and Tools. This is a 6 days webinar series of which we are in the second day, and this is being organized by Kaash Foundation's Center of Academic and Professional Development in collaboration with the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums, Government of Maharashtra. Moving on to our second speaker, I would like to quote Thomas Jefferson over here. He says, "Let us save what remains, not by walls and locks which fence them from the public eye, and use in consigning them to the waste of time, but by such a multiplication of copies as shall place them beyond the reach of accident." This is really true of the archives today, and especially digital archives. In today's world, when we are moving towards digitization, archives have really understood the importance of digitizing their records in order to increase their accessibility to the people at one click, as well as to increase their durability in order to remain for a longer period of time. With this, we have our next illustrious scholar on board, Dr. James Onley from the Qatar Digital Library, Doha in Qatar. Dr. James Onley, we are very honored to have you on board for our second International Faculty Development Program. Dr. James Onley is the Director, Historical Research and Partnerships at the Qatar National Library in Doha, Qatar. And he will be deliberating on the importance of digital archives by using the Qatar Digital Library as his case study. So we welcome you on board, and the floor is now yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to join this fantastic workshop, and greetings from Qatar. I'd like to tell you about the Qatar Digital Library, but before that, a more general discussion about what digital libraries are. My talk will, cover, first of all, background, explaining what they are, how they're created, what their benefits are, and what their disadvantages are. After that, I'll go into a case study of the Qatar Digital Library, looking at what it is, what's in it, and some search techniques. This is very important, search techniques. So, but before I do that, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to be involved in this exciting project. The Qatar Digital Library is the largest digital repository on the Middle East. But I'm an old-fashioned historian. My PhD is in history, looking at the historical connections between India and the Gulf. And before coming to the National Library, I was a university professor teaching Gulf history, culture, heritage, politics, as well as broader Middle Eastern history as well. But I, about 10 years ago, became involved in a project to identify archival records on the Gulf region in India and the UK for a project funded by the Qatar Foundation. So this project was just to scope what was there. But it became quite involved, and over time we ended up employing about 30 researchers working in the Mahar State Archive and the National Archives of India. And this project is, in fact, still ongoing. This led to a number of other similar projects that I was involved in to scope archives for eventual digitization. Very few historians are actually interested in how archives work and how to find archival material. They just want to find what they're looking for and go. But I became interested in understanding the structure of archives, how they're organized, and it requires the skills of a detective sometimes in order to locate the files you're looking for. Often the archive staff themselves don't know where this is. So I discovered that there was a need for experts like myself to dive deep into the archives and to draw up catalogs. Surprisingly, many archives are not cataloged at the item level. So I became involved in a number of these projects over time. And in the course of approaching the Qatar National Library to be involved in yet another one, this one on traditional architecture in the Gulf region, and asking if they would like to be involved, if they'd like to fund this project. To my surprise, I was offered the position of director of research, which I accepted, obviously, and given a very large budget to continue my work, but now at a much higher level with the backing of the entire library. So now my mission is to scope archives everywhere for material on West Asia more broadly, but specifically Qatar and its immediate region, the Gulf region. And so my work continues, and that's why I'm here today with you. So that's me. Now let's go on to the digital archives and what are they? Now this is an outsider's perspective. I'm an historian. I don't have a qualification or training in digital archives. I work with people in the National Library of Qatar who do specialize in this. So I've learned a lot over the 3 years that I've been with the library. But this is a layman's attempt to explain what they are to other historians, to other non-digital experts. So I thought the best way to explain what it is to compare what we already know, that is the terminology of archives as we know them, with the terminology of digital archives. So compare like with like so that you understand what is this, what is that. So I've drawn up a table for you explaining the physical and what it correlates to. So we all know the archive building. So this would equate to a server, a large computer storing data. The archival collection that would be within the archive in digital archives, we refer to that as a database. Then the reading room that one goes to in a physical archive, in the digital world, that is the user interface, the website that's designed. Now, some are very good, some are not very good, some are very basic. But the website is one component of the digital archive. It's the last bit, the bit that the public sees. Then we have the reader's desk. That's, of course, your computer, and it could be anywhere, at home, at the office, in a cafe. Then we have request procedures. So in an archive, there's a policy designed about how requests are handled. Then you have staff who consider the request. Before you can even get into the archive to request items, you have to get a reader's pass, all of that. So these are the request procedures. But in the digital world, that's all handled by software. Furthermore, a request slip that you would fill in once you're in the reading room, in the digital world, that's simply the search box. So very simple. Very important to know, an item that is an individual file, that could be, for example, a photograph or a map, something that's just one page. In the digital world, we call that a digital object. That could be anything. It could be a sound recording. It could be a photograph of a building, or a scan or an image of a document, historical document. Then we have reference numbers that you have to fill in on your request form. But in the digital world, we refer to that as a unique identifier. Then we have catalog entries. So when you go into the archive and you pull off the catalog, for example, a printed catalog, and you open up and you're looking for the list of all the files, and you find the file that you're looking for, there'll be a description next to it explaining what is in that file, its title, its date, its author, provenance, a description of its contents. That's a catalog entry, an item level catalog entry. In the digital world, we call all of that metadata, which is often described as data about data, but it's simply a catalog entry. Then we have the catalog standards. Now, archivists, when they receive an item, or in a museum, when they receive an item, they have procedures or standards, rather, that they have to follow when it comes to describing that item. There's different fields that they have to fill in, such as the title, the date it was created, these sorts of things. In the digital world, we call those catalog standards metadata standards or metadata schema. So you can see it's rather different terminology. This terminology applies also to other things, not just digital archives. So it's an industry-wide digital sort of terminology that is being used for archives. So that's a bit of the what equates to what. So hopefully that will help you understand. I'll touch on a few of these things as I go through my talk. Next thing I'll talk about is how are digital archives created. So a digital archive is created when the owner of a collection, that could be an archive or an individual, as well as the copyright owner, they're not always the same, agree to digitize this collection and then place it online. They might place it online for free, or they might place it online and then put require a payment that you have to subscribe and pay a fee, such as, for example, JSTOR. So then once that agreement is in place, they either do it themselves or they might enter into this with a digitalization partner. So a number of people will play a role. It might be a company or it might be another institution. In this case, for us, we, the Qatar National Library, partner with archives and libraries around the world, and we work with them, sometimes finding the missing components, such as people who will do the digitization, people who do the metadata, and we'll put that all together and to proceed. But before that happens, an agreement has to be signed. Lawyers are involved. Very important, the terms of use are agreed upon. Now, ideally, and what the Qatar National Library strives for, is that all material that we digitize is available free online for non-commercial use. All you have to do is cite the source of it, as you would if you were citing another book or article, but you're free to use it. Then after that, we set up a project team of people who will do, for example, grabbing the records from the archive, bringing them up. The first step would then be to for a conservator to look at them to make sure that they're in good enough condition to digitize. If they're not, then they'll be conserved. Then after that, catalogers, and this is the backbone of any digitization project. Catalogers will begin to write the metadata. So here's an example of metadata from the Qatar Digital Library. As you can see, it's a standard catalog entry with all the information. This is really, metadata is very important because when it comes to searching for documents, the metadata is what helps you find what you're looking for. So it goes well beyond a traditional archive where all you have is the catalog and the file title and maybe a few keywords written next to it, or perhaps a subject catalog organized by topic that might help you find things. But the metadata on a digital archive is far more detailed. So you're far more likely to find the specific topic you're looking for. Whereas in a traditional approach, you would never find it. After the metadata is done, which accounts for about 90% of all digitization projects, indeed they should be called metadata projects rather than digitization projects, then on to the digitization of the file, the manuscript itself. Here's a photograph of a member of the digitization team in the British Library, who we are working with to digitize their collections on West Asia and Qatar in the Gulf region. So as you can see, digitization can take a number of forms. This is a overhead scanner. So no glass or anything will be placed on top of the object. Sometimes if the object is a thick book, you need to have a glass placed on top of it to press it down to have the overhead scanner scan the full 2 pages. Other times they use an overhead camera to photograph it. If the page can lay flat, then they will do that. Once this is done, the digital object or objects, if they're collected into a file, are then matched up with the metadata together, and they're placed on a database. The database, of course, is your hard drive on a computer. But here we're talking about these very large computers, since each file size is quite large. We scan usually in TIFF format. And if anybody's seen the difference between a TIFF file and a JPEG, it's quite substantial. Each TIFF page could be, many megabytes. So the size of a database for an entire collection is vast. So it likewise needs very large storage. Then the database is placed on a server. Like I said, these large computers. Usually they're cloud-based. By cloud-based, I mean as opposed to a server in the archive itself. For example, the records that we're digitizing in the British Library are not placed on a server in the British Library. They're uploaded to the internet, where they're then placed on a server, a cloud-based server, which then can be accessed by all other people involved in the running of the Qatar Digital Library. We're doing this with a company in the UK called CoGAP, who ingest the files and then manage the interface. And we all oversee all of that process. So once that's ingested into the database, and it's then available online, and anybody can access it, because thanks to the metadata, one can search and find what you're looking for. So what are the benefits? Well, as I've mentioned, the number one benefit of digital archives is the search function. Digital searching yields far greater results. Sometimes one is overwhelmed with the results, but far greater results than you would ever find in a normal archive. Furthermore, you can find what you're looking for within seconds, whereas in a traditional archive, it would take you weeks, even months, to find everything that you're looking for. So it saves you time. It also saves you money. All you need is a computer and an internet connection. Whereas to visit a traditional archive, it would cost you travel, airfare, hotel, visa, all of that. So it saves a lot. Usually, the material is free online, so you can download everything as well. Not all archives, digital archives, allow download, but the Qatar Digital Library allows the downloading of an entire file or just a page in PDF format. And the result of digital archives is that it's changing the nature of archival research and of scholarship. It's making far more accessible things that used to be inaccessible, very difficult to access. There are a number of obstacles to research. One is distance and accessibility, physical accessibility. Another, of course, is language. Digital archives can also help bridge that barrier as well. The Qatar Digital Library, for example, is bilingual. It's in English and Arabic. And any other language that's on there, if, for example, French or Ottoman records, we will also have those available in, or at least the metadata, at least, in Arabic and in English. So the language barrier is very important, but digital libraries are helping, or digital archives are allowing historians and researchers to overcome that. Disadvantages. So as I've mentioned, one of the disadvantages of digital archives is information overload, which is why search techniques are very important. And often, even using Google, for example, a lot of people are unaware of how they can refine their search techniques to find what they're looking for, using things like filters. So information overload is the first thing that one encounters. On the Qatar Digital Library, you will have information overload in extreme. We have nearly 2 million pages of digital content on the Qatar Digital Library. So you really need to have good search techniques in order to find what you're looking for. Otherwise, it's just overwhelming. Another disadvantage, of course, is that no archive, if it's a regular sized archive such as the Mahara State Archive in Mumbai or the British Library in London, can ever digitize its entire collection. These collections, of course, are vast, and the effort and time required to digitize is also quite extensive. So it's unlikely that an archive would have its full collection available online. Thus, when a researcher is searching, they're not finding everything. You're finding material and you're finding it out of context sometimes. So a digital archive doesn't replace a trip to the archive. It augments it. It means that you can do a lot more research before going to the archive to then complete your research, because sometimes there'll be material that you will not be able to access because it's not available. So it's very important to realize that and do your full research for an archive, and then look at the catalogs, the printed catalogs, for other material that perhaps is not digitized, and then either request to have that digitized. You can pay through an archives copy service, or you can go and visit yourself and take a look at this other material. But if you limit your search just to what's available on the digital archive, you're only getting a partial picture. So that's one of the disadvantages. Mind you, this is a disadvantage of archives in general, of course, because what is there is what's only left as a result of fate. A number of things have intervened before a file has ended up in an archive. There's been a pruning process. Also, the archives are naturally selective. So often, for example, in many archives around the world, they're colonial archives. They lack local material, or the local material they have is selective. It's just letters and reports from local elites, such as governors or local rulers. Another disadvantage is metadata. A digital archive is only as good as its metadata, and metadata requires an immense amount of effort. In our work, the Qatar National Library's work with archives around the world, when we obtain copies of their collections on the Gulf region, we ask them, please, could you also give us the catalog entries that you have, the metadata for it? So they will have, often what archives do is they just simply, they do it fast and cheap. They only use their online catalog metadata. They match it to the material once it's been digitized, and that is it. So that really limits your search function. In archives where this happens, therefore, you really need to use the catalog. You have to get a copy of the catalog. If it's not available in the archive, you have to purchase a copy or ask the archive to send you a scan of it so that you can go through the catalog yourself to find the material you're looking for. You have to understand the structure of the archival collection, therefore, to find what you're looking for, since you can't use keyword searching. Other disadvantages are a number of digital archives do not allow download. The National Archive of India, for example, has a very large digital archive, but they do not allow download. So you can read the items online, but if you have a slow internet connection, that really interferes with your research. So these are disadvantages. Finally, a lot of material, if it's typed, can be OCR, that is optical character recognition, so that you can search a PDF file as you would a Word file. But if a document is handwritten, by the way, software will do this, but if the document is handwritten, it's often very difficult to OCR that document. It takes a different approach. And most archives don't do that, or do they have the time or the money to do that? So if it's handwritten, then you'll have to read page by page the document yourself. So these are, but you would do that anyway in a physical archive. So these are some of the disadvantages of digital archives. So this is now concludes my first part of the talk about what are digital archives. And now I'd like to talk to you about case study of the Qatar Digital Library that I've been involved in for the last number of years. So what is the Qatar Digital Library? This is it. The URL is www.qdl.qa, QA for Qatar, and we refer to the Qatar Digital Library as just the QDL. The QDL was established or launched in October 2014 and is now the largest digital repository on the Middle East. It focuses on West Asia, specifically Qatar and the Gulf region, so the Arabian Peninsula, Iran, and Iraq. It also has Arabic manuscripts on science, mainly from the medieval period. And it seeks to explain or to show the Arab or the Islamic contribution to global knowledge today by looking at the roots of that, going back to these original source texts in Arabic. The digital library, as you can see, this is when you go in, has nearly 2 million individual pages across roughly 17,500 individual files. At the moment, the only material that's on there online now at the moment is British Library records. I'll talk about all the different records that we'll be eventually putting online. But this project started as a collaborative endeavor with the British Library in 2014. It then expanded its vision once I joined in 2017 to encompass collections globally, not just in the British Library, but also in India, in Turkey, in the Netherlands, throughout Europe, and anywhere where there are archival collections on Qatar and the Gulf region. As I've said, the archive is fully bilingual, at least the metadata is. So as you can see, this is the user interface, the landing page in Arabic, and the search page in Arabic. So what's on it? Well, at the moment, we just have material from the British Library. If you go to the British Library's website, they have a special page for this project. It's known as the British Library Qatar Foundation Partnership, because the Qatar Digital Library was an initiative launched by the chairperson of the Qatar Foundation, Sheikh Moza, and then handed over to run and expand to the Qatar National Library subsequently. But since the partnership was founded before the Qatar National Library became involved. The partnership is still known as the British Library Qatar Foundation Partnership. The Qatar National Library is part of the Qatar Foundation, along with other institutions such as Georgetown University or University College London, a number of satellite campuses here in Doha. It's an educational institution. It has its own research fund as well, funds research, and its mission is to foster the knowledge economy. So the Qatar Digital Library is a part of that by promoting research and knowledge creation. It's its gift to the world. Let me play this video, which explains to you the partnership with the British Library and the Qatar Digital Library and what's in it more broadly. So just allow me a moment to switch over. I have to share screen. Okay, here we go. Let me see if I can. I think I have to switch sharing. Okay.
The British Library has been working with the Qatar National Library and the Qatar Foundation since 2012. It's all about opening up the library's collections to as wide audience as possible. So we've been working on developing a website that's the Qatar Digital Library, putting as much content and as many expert articles, making it available for users in English and Arabic, and making it completely free.
I believe that creates a new dialogue between our generation and the elder generation to talk more about the history and to have information from both sides. So it is unique.
We've been delighted with the success of the project so far. More than 1 million items have been digitised. That's in itself an extraordinary achievement, and that's a lasting achievement now. But the reach to users has been fantastic. Over 1 million users and 9 million page views. These are very, very significant figures, and that's only set to grow now as the whole project becomes part of the mainstream culture of scholarship about the region.
The partnership with the British Library through the QDL affords us the opportunity to offer to our patrons and researchers a material that we wouldn't be able to find or access any other way. This chart is in the office records and is on the QDL. So you can see Qatar as a fully formed peninsula here with a detailed history of how the chart was made and all the previous surveys that they based it off of. The Qatar Digital Library is for everybody: scientists, geographers, people who are interested in the present but want some historical background, or people who are just taking a look for illustrations, for novels, for artwork. The possibilities are endless.
It's very useful to the researchers, not only from Qatar and the Gulf area, but from all over the world.
وما نراه ونلمسه الآن هو جهد عظيم وراية يربط بين الحضارات من الشرق إلى الغرب، من الهند وشرق آسيا إلى أمريكا وإلى قارة أوروبا.
You won't find other digital libraries out there with the sorts of resources that we have in QDL because of the geography-specific content. It makes it very strong for Qatar and for the region in terms of a resource, and it's something we're very, very proud of.
This is my favorite item in Qatar Digital Library portal. Giving you such an access online wherever you are to a material with that kind of resolution, that will help the researchers to do their research better and easy and wherever they are.
We are diving in history and looking around, so it's like a door to the 19th century.
It's nice being a part of this. It's like I'm contributing in the next step of technology and history being together.
The immediacy of access to records has been really extraordinary. The provision of metadata, of keywords, suddenly opens up vistas to research which were not possible with paper archives.
We've been incredibly pleased by how well the Qatar Digital Library has done. It's a real gem of a partnership for the British Library. There's something really quite special about two national libraries coming together and producing this wonderful resource.
We are happy that we extended our project into phase 3, and we are hoping to be able to cover additional material that shed more light on the state of Qatar and the Gulf and the Arab world in general.
We've been on a journey to really push the boundaries, test what's possible in terms of creating a global digital resource, and the prospect for knowledge exchange, partnership, different teams from both libraries getting together to learn from each other is going to be part of the story of the next few years.
So that gives you some background on our partnership with the British Library. But since then, we are now in phase 3 of our ongoing project and partnership with the British Library. And soon we will have digitized 2 million pages of material from the British Library. But a number of years ago, when I joined the National Library, we began to expand our efforts to include other archival collections. So our next project that we're now actively involved in is this one, known as the Gulf Architecture Project, or GAP. Now, GAP is in partnership with the, here's another page, with the Archeum Center at the University of Liverpool's School of Architecture. And this project is rather different from a traditional archive project in that the collections are dispersed, usually in private hands all over the world, held by usually former architects or archaeologists, people who were interested in recording the built environment of the Gulf region. Now, these records, these collections are at risk because they're in private hands, and when their owners pass away, often their heirs are uninterested in these collections, and they may languish in attics, perhaps even be thrown away, rather than be given to archives to look after. But even if they are given to archives, they just form one small collection in a much larger archive, and are often difficult to find, let alone access. So this project is aimed at finding and then digitizing these collections wherever they are around the world. Let me see. Another archive that we've been working with for the last number of years is the Ottoman State Archives in Istanbul. Now, why would we bother with the Ottoman Empire? Well, the answer, of course, is that much of Eastern Arabia, that is Iraq all the way down to Qatar, were a part of the Ottoman Empire up until World War I. And so these records contain invaluable information about the history and heritage of this region. So we have been digitizing this material for the last couple of years. Now, the problem with Ottoman Turkish is that it's a dead language. It's only spoken and read by scholars these days, not by the average person in Turkey, and certainly not by the average person in Qatar. So this material is also therefore being translated into Arabic, and the metadata will be available not only in Turkish, but in Arabic and in English. So one can search and find what they're looking for. But at the end of the day, you really do need to know Ottoman Turkish in order to read these documents. But this is very important because these are a neglected source, and the availability of this material will open up new possibilities for scholars. Even if you don't read Ottoman Turkish, you could probably enter into an arrangement, perhaps through a research project, to bring those who do know Ottoman Turkish on board. They can read and translate this material so that it can be used to shed new light on the history of the country or region or issue that you're looking at. We've also digitized the Dutch East India Company records on the Gulf region in the National Archives of the Netherlands. Now, these records are in Old Dutch. Again, they require language expertise in order to read them, but the metadata as well, when we received it, was of the type I told you before. It was basic metadata for these files. It wasn't rich enough. So we are currently now looking at what we call a metadata enrichment project, whereby experts, historians will look at this material and then write more detailed descriptions of each file, and also make sure that this is available in both English and in Arabic, so anybody can search. But again, once you find the document, you need to know Old Dutch and be able to read that handwriting. Another collection that we're actively involved in right now and digitizing are a collection of 64 Arabic manuscripts in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the National Library of France. And one record in particular is the oldest Arabic manuscript on Arab seafaring in the Gulf region, a manuscript that dates from the early 900s. And we want to do some more work around that to shed light on this and related manuscripts that we'll be digitizing in future. These ended up being the source text for the Sinbad stories, the 7 stories of Sinbad. In some cases, the author of the Sinbad stories merely copy-pasted from these original source texts. So this is another project we're involved in. We're also about to sign a digitization agreement with the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which has its own archive of its diplomatic records on the Gulf region. And so we will be digitizing those after the lockdown ends, and we're able to proceed with our digitization efforts in Paris. In this case, this is a good example of how digitization projects work. The archive doesn't have its own digitization office. It outsources that to a company which has to bid every year or so for the contract with the ministry to do all of its digitization. So in this case, the French archive, the French diplomatic archive, told us to contact this company and to enter into a separate agreement. So we had to negotiate a separate agreement with them to do this digitization work. Once they have done that, and we will have most likely received the basic metadata for each of these files, we'll then have to do a metadata enrichment project with experts who will then look at this material, write more extended metadata for it, and then, of course, translate it into Arabic and Arabic and English. And another project that we're also involved in now is with the Maharashtra State Archive. Now, the Maharashtra State Archive, we negotiated an agreement with them back in 2018 and early 2019. And we are now waiting for the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi to approve the agreement so we can sign it and then proceed with that. On this project, I've had the privilege of working with Dr. Cheya Goswami, who's part of this workshop, and she has been leading a team of researchers for the last number of years. In fact, going back to that original project I told you about in 2012, she's been leading this team in its efforts to catalog the archive's amazing collection on West Asia. And here's some pictures of the archive itself, an absolutely stunning building, a real gem of Gothic architecture, a Gothic revival architecture. Now, I'd like to end with showing you some search techniques on the Qatar Digital Library. Now, these will apply to most archives, so you need to be aware of them. The tools, the search tools that one uses are dependent on what each archive has. So what I show you on the Qatar Digital Library, those tools may or may not be available on other digital archives. But keep watching for them because these are more or less standard features. So let me now share a screen going back to my, here we go.
Dr. James, I am really sorry to interrupt you. Could you please put on your audio so that you're audible?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So here we are, the search page for the Qatar Digital Library. We don't have an advanced search feature. So when you type in a search topic, the default mode will be and. So any word that you type in, if you type in 2 words, it will look for any file that has both those words, not either or, but both. Some fields have either or. So if you type in 2 words, it will find all files that have either one or the other, not necessarily both. So in order to ensure that you're looking for the precise term that you're looking for, you need to use quotation marks. So the quotation marks are a standard feature that you'll find in Google, as you're aware. So for instance, if we want to look for any records of Hindu temples in the Gulf region, I would write in Hindu temple in quotation marks. Now, I should therefore be able to find, when I click search, any file that mentions it. And alas, we have 22 records with the term Hindu temples. So if we take a look here, Muscat Administration reports, there's the word Hindu temple appears in 2 pages. And if you click here, you'll see these pages here will have it the term itself highlighted. So if I click here, now I can zoom in. Here in Muscat, we can read here. Okay, so here's a reference to a Hindu temple in Muscat, and another reference about repairs on the edges of the road below the. So this gives you reference to a Hindu temple. Now, today, of course, this Hindu. There are at least two Hindu temples in Muscat. In Old Muscat, there are 2, and so this is well known. But if you're looking for Hindu temples that existed in the past and do not exist today, then this would be a significant find. Just simply the mention of it, certainly in the further back in time you go, the mere mention of that will tell you a lot, and then you can, in this way, map the presence of Hindu temples when and where in the Gulf region. Now, if I wanted to view the entire document, I could click on this here, the file name, and I can now scroll through the document as a whole, so I can view those pages in context. If I want to download the entire document, I click here, and it'll download the entire file in PDF format. So that's a really great asset. One can quickly collect a library of all relevant documents. In a simple day, you could accomplish as much as you could normally accomplish after several months of research, in this case, at the British Library. And it would all be for free, whereas that 2 or 3 month visit to the British Library could cost you thousands of pounds. While we're here, let me just show you some examples. Here's the metadata. It tells you all the stuff that you would expect in a very detailed catalog entry. And shows you how this record forms part of a larger series. In this case, this here is the India Office Records. R is the Residency Records series. 15 is the Gulf Residency Records. 6 is the Muscat Political Agency. And then 339 is the file number within that sub-record series. And here we have the dates. More metadata here. So if I want to look for related things, you can also search in this way. You can click on related keywords. Not all digital repositories have this, but we do. And now here we go. Once I've downloaded this file, as you can see, we have all the metadata that you've just seen on the front page. It tells you everything that you want to know. And then here's the record itself. Now, another search feature of the Qatar Digital Library is the timeline. You can do this when you're, for example, looking for news on Google. You can indicate, I want to look for news between this date and this date. And so too you can on the Qatar Digital Library. So if I click here, show timeline, it shows me the appearance of the search term Hindu temple across these 22 different files on the Qatar Digital Library. And here's the timeline. So it's between, as we can see here, the earliest is 1873, and the latest is from, 1985. That's 1984. So now if I just want to look for the one in 1873, I just type that in. Here's the one file. I click on it. And we have 2 records indeed that mention it. And again, here's the page. So if I click on this, I've now narrowed my search down to just 1 year, 1873. And here's the search term highlighted, Hindu temple. And if I want to download this one page on its own, I just click here. This is the download icon. I can download this one page on its own. Or if I want to download the entire document, I click here for the entire document. Slow internet connection. That's another disadvantage of digital libraries. Sometimes these files are very large. So you really do need to have a good internet connection. Another technique, by the way, when you're downloading, often it's best to connect the Ethernet directly to your laptop instead of using the internet to get a higher internet speed. Well, anyway, we'll skip this, but as you can see, it would take me to the overall document, which I can then download as well. Now, if we go back to the search page, I'll show you a few other things that we can do. Here, if I want to get rid of the search terms, I click here to delete that. So we're back to the main search term again. On the left, there will be filters. So now I can filter by, within these 22 documents, I can filter by what is filter by copyright, what's open government license, Creative Commons license. But there are, in fact, even more filters than that. So if I remove this search term, when we go back to the original main search page here, you'll see the full range of filters available. I can search by type. So I'm looking, for example, maps. I just want maps, or I just want photographs, for instance. If I just click on photographs right here, and I only want to see what photographs there are in the Qatar Digital Library without any other filters such as the search term, here we go, as you can see. Now, let's say I'm looking for a photograph of a particular place, Muscat. So now I type in Muscat. Now my filter of photograph is still in place, so now we'll only search photographs of Muscat. And here we go. We have 51 photographs of Muscat. And here's a photograph of the old Portuguese fort, one of the old Portuguese forts in Old Muscat. Again, if I want to download this, I can just simply click here. If I want to zoom in, I can zoom in like this. And the detail and the resolution is, as you can see, very good. A word to the wise, if you download this file, it will download it as a lower resolution file. And you won't get the same resolution that you do online. So if you want a copy of a high resolution, a copy of this file, then you would contact us through the website, through the Qatar Digital Library, asking for a high resolution copy that you want to use, for example, for your book that you're publishing, and you explain what you're going to use it for, and we would give you a high resolution copy. Right. So That's filter by type. So let's remove that filter. Other filters we have are by place. You click here to show more, and it gives you all the different places that are mentioned in the metadata. So all of these places are mentioned in the metadata of the file. So as you can see, the better the metadata, the better the search results. One can also search by time period. One can also filter by language. So let's say we want to see, well, what are all the documents that we have on the Qatar Digital Library in Gujarati? So we click here, and there are 10. In future, there will be a lot more. Well, here they are. So that's now once you and I have my search term, by the way, that's Gujarati mentioning Muscat. But if I remove Muscat and we're only looking for all files on Gujarati across everything, across all 2 million pages, we will get a different result. Not 10 records, but many more. Again, slow internet, my apologies. Let me do a shortcut and go back. Right. Now, if we go to Gujarati, we have 14 records in Gujarati. Ottoman Turkish, Syriac, Armenian, Kurdish. You can see these are all the different languages. So this is really, really helpful. For example, if I'm interested only in letters written by Arab rulers in the Gulf region to the British Indian government in the 19th century, I click on Arabic. That will help me narrow down my search right away. Another filter is by predetermined topics. These are also in the metadata. So even if the files themselves are not organized in this way, if I want all files to do with World War I click here, it will assemble for me a collection of all those files, all in this case 145, and I can download them all if I want and then go through them. If I'm doing, for example, a book on World War I in the Gulf region. So that's everything that you need right there. Another filter we have is by organization. So the British Foreign Office, for example, or the Viceroy of India, any file relating to these people. Again, that's in the metadata. And then finally, we have copyright. So if I'm interested in publishing this, and I only want material that I could use for certain purposes, the copyright will tell me whether or not there are any restrictions at all, or so on. By the minimum that we require is that everything is available on an open access basis for non-commercial purposes. That would include, by the way, if you are a scholar and you want to publish some items, photographs or maps or something like that in your scholarly monograph, or an article, that's fine, because you yourself are not making money out of that. But if you wanted to put together a collection of documents and publish them, such as Archive Editions does this publishing, it's now a branch of the Cambridge University Press. We would not allow that, because that is a commercial endeavor to make money. And then finally, you can use the filter of by institution. So you can see British Library, and now we're beginning to see some material from the Qatar National Library itself. We have our own archive, known as the Heritage Library, that has a very significant collection on Qatar and the Gulf region. So if I only want to see material from our own collection, I can do that. In future, we will have collections, as I've said, from many other archives, the ones that I've shown you, and you can sort simply by that. And that takes me, furthermore, last thing here we have our search tips. Now, the search tips, if you read them, it'll show you other ways to search. One is by using file number. So the British Library has its own unique file numbering system. And in future, when we have other collections online, you'll be able to search by the file number as well. So if I, for example, were to search by this, there we go. That's the record number of a particular file from the British Library, but it's in quotation. So I'm looking only for files relating to that, I can search for this file. This is from the Gulf Residency records. And here they are. And you can see it's right there. That's the file. Okay, so this is, it turns out to be many different parts of this file, perhaps parts 1 and part 2, but that's them there. It'll show you related files after that. Now, let's say I only want files within this one record series, the R15-1, all right? And there might be hundreds within that. I can search in this way, like that. And as you can see, I get far more results. I get everything that falls within the R15-1 series, which is the Boucher Residency Records series. If I wanted to do that to another subseries, which is the Bahrain Political Agency, I can search by that, and it'll get me the records relating to that. You can also take a look here, expert articles. So if I'm interested, let's say in, again, let's say the presence of Hindus, Hindu communities, let's say in the Gulf region, not only can I search by file, but I can also, in this tab here, search by expert articles. This is a feature of the Qatar Digital Library that not all archives, in fact, not many at all, have, whereby the archivists at the British Library or scholars will write pieces about aspects of the collections. Some will be what we call finding aids. So it'll tell you about how to use this particular record series or sub-series within our collection. And others will be about particular topics. So if I click here, it's odd. I'm, for some reason, being asked for my password. I don't know what's going on here. I'll try another file. Here we go. So here is an expert article written by Martin Woodward, who is an archivist at the British Library, about the pearl diving industry in the Gulf region. And then it shows files on this particular topic, and it's all hyperlinked. So if I click here, it will take me to the file itself within the Qatar Digital Library. So this is helpful for new researchers who are unfamiliar with all the range of topics on the Qatar Digital Library. It's an educational tool. It can be used, therefore, as a resource for graduate students. If you're giving a research methodology course, you can assign them a particular topic. They can go to the Qatar Digital Library. They can read up on that particular topic here before going into looking at the primary source material. So you can see that the Qatar Digital Library is multidimensional. It's quite a resource, and we're very proud of it. This, I think, concludes my overview of digital libraries and the Qatar Digital Library. Thank you very much for inviting me to give a talk about this, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir, for your interesting presentation on the digital archives and the Qatar library. Thank you very much for introducing to us what digital archives is actually and what is the Qatar library and what does it contain and how does it function, and actually showing us through the digital library over here, so that I'm sure that our participants will have very well understood about how to go about it whenever they try to access it in the present or in the future for their research purposes. And so therefore we are very honored to have you here, sir. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to be on board for today's session. And we all at Kaash Foundation, as well as the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums, Government of Maharashtra, would express our heartfelt gratitude to you and also to our first speaker for today, Dr. Nestor Castro, for being with us today. Thank you. So with this we come. So with this we come to the end of our session for the second day of International Faculty Development Program, organized by Kaash Foundation's Center of Academic and Professional Development in collaboration with the Directorate of Museum, Archaeology and Museums, Government of Maharashtra. We meet you all tomorrow again at 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. With two another stalwarts in the field of history. The first one being Dr. Tejas Garg, who is the Director of State Archaeological Survey of Maharashtra. He will be presenting on archaeology, a tool for reconstruction of the past. And our second scholar for tomorrow would be Dr. Gauri Mahulikar, who is the Dean of Chinnamaya Vishwa Vidyapeeth in Kerala, and who is also the ex-head of the Department of Sanskrit, University of Mumbai. It would be a humble request to all the participants to kindly fill in the feedback form given in the description below the YouTube video in order to be eligible for the certificate of participation. So with this, we end our session for today. Thank you very much, and we meet you all tomorrow at 10 a.m. on our YouTube channel. Thank you.